The gas attack in Syria is just the latest in a long line of horrific tragedies and the 6-year-long civil war there. Is this really something we want to get involved in? Ambassador John Bolton joins me now. He's a former UN ambassador and, of course, a Fox News contributor. Welcome back, Ambassador Bolton.
Glad to be with you.
So, obviously, the president is outraged, and there are some horrific facts we are learning about that chemical attack. And, you know, the obvious response is, well, let's go over there and do something about it. But the problem is what follows if we go over and do something about it. What would your response be?
Well, I think this atrocity should be taken in the bigger strategic context that's very different from what Barack Obama faced. Number one, Obama's strategy against ISIS had not brought him to the point where the destruction of ISIS in Syria and Iraq was in contemplation, number one. And number two, we didn't therefore have to face the question that Trump has to face, what comes after the defeat of ISIS. Moreover, Obama never was serious about getting rid of the Assad regime, never serious about his red line. Why? Because Syria's two most important allies, Iran and Russia, were critical to getting the nuclear deal with Iran. Trump thinks the Iran nuclear deal was one of the worst ones ever negotiated. So you put these two strategic factors together. ISIS will soon be destroyed, we hope, and the Iran nuclear deal, which gives them hegemony, gives their efforts at hegemony enormous sway within the region, is detrimental to American interests. So the windup here is, in addition to doing something about the Assad regime's atrocity, we need to do it with the strategic context of the region in mind. And that means, in effect, the conflict that comes after the destruction of ISIS, so that Iran and its allies, the Baghdad government, Assad in Syria, and Hezbollah, do not emerge stronger.
But the the creation of some of these groups certainly hasn't led to their end, as we're seeing in a war in Afghanistan that is still ongoing, that you could argue had its roots in the 80s when we were fighting a proxy war against the Soviet Union. Obviously, a proxy war or a hot war with Russia would be a very bad idea here. Now, Senator John McCain has spoken at length about arming the Free Syrian Army. How do you even identify that army at this point?
Well, we don't. And now I'll finish my answer. The question is, what comes after the destruction of the ISIS caliphate? Will ISIS completely disappear? Probably not. But it's likely to migrate to Libya or Yemen or Somalia or some other place where there's now complete anarchy. And we have to have something that replaces ISIS. There's no way, in my view, the Sunnis of western Iraq and eastern Syria are happily going to go back over the governments of from Iraq and Syria, respectively. So I think this is an opportune moment to say that we will deal a substantial blow to the Assad regime and also tell the Russians
that I have a question about that. I just want to stop you right there before we move on to the next point. Let's say you do deal that fatal blow. Assad is a horrible person who has done awful things and, as I said, displaced millions of people in his own country. So let's say he is displaced. So either, you've got two scenarios that follow from that. Either we're in the business of nation building, which hasn't gone well in the Middle East, or, the country further devolves into chaos and, again, is another petri dish, if not for ISIS, then for something else which could conceivably, with the weapons that we've left behind, be much worse.
You're focused on too limited a problem. The country is in chaos now. The issue is what the circumstances will be once ISIS is defeated, unless you're backing away from that. If you want ISIS defeated, then you have to look at the post-ISIS environment. And I'm saying that not only do you go after the Syrian Air Force, but you tell the Russians to fuel up their planes and pack up their gear and personnel and leave their air base at Latakia. Otherwise, you simply substitute the Russian Air Force for what Assad's Air Force used to be.
I understand that, but Ambassador, with all due respect, the problem with that is Russia can say, hey, you know what? We have been invited here. We're the ones who are actually working with Syria, and they are allies here. And, Russia's also on equal footing internationally because they're also permanent members of the Security Council.
The Security Council is irrelevant to this. So then we come to the point where the Trump administration confronts Russia backing this regime in Syria that is undergirded by Iran, which benefits from the worst diplomatic deal in American history. So it brings right to the fore the contradictions of the idea that we can work with Russia against terrorism. They don't care about defeating ISIS. They want to preserve Assad. And by the way, the world's central banker for international terrorism is Russia's ally, Iran.
No, I understand that. And then we've funneled more money into Iran with this bad deal. I absolutely agree with you there. I think, you know, getting Russia to turn and leave is going to be very problematic. I think even if you displace Assad, there's no guarantee that we're going to win against ISIS, whatever that means. I don't even know what it means to win against ISIS anymore, because ISIS is just a convenient name for a brand of murderous theocratic ideology that will morph into something else. And the one thing that people have not been able to do satisfactorily, particularly hawks on the right, is say exactly what we are going to do to replace that brand of thinking and that ideology, because right now there is no answer.
Finished? What we're going to do is counter the ideology that Obama was unwilling to admit existed. But the near-term objective, which is quite important, is destroying the ISIS caliphate in what used to be Syria and Iraq, because it's the existence of that physical domain that gives ISIS the ability to recruit and train and deploy terrorists in the United States and Western Europe. Now, as I said earlier, they will try to redeploy elsewhere, and we're going to have to deal with that. But if we can break the hold on the territory they have now, we have a chance to refashion the map of the Middle East that has been ripped up. I think
that's
Syria
not refashion the map of the Middle East.
Will you let me finish? Syria and Iraq have ceased to exist.
Nonstop for about 5 minutes. I've let you finish,
you know
but
what,
you
Kennedy?
keep bringing up
it's
points
a
that don't make
complicated
sense.
subject. You can't talk about it in 15-second bites. The Kurds are already independent in Iraq, and they're not going back in. The Sunnis are not going to go back into an Iraq that's dominated by the Ayatollahs in Tehran, and the Sunnis in Syria are not going to go back under the Alawite regime. You can either let it descend further into chaos, or you can leave ISIS alone. That's your choice.
And it will generate its own form of chaos. Ambassador, I know it gets heated. I thank you very much. I appreciate it. I think you are better versed on the subject than just about anyone else. And just because I don't agree with every one of your points doesn't mean that I'm not listening, because I certainly am. So thank you.
If you'd only let me talk a little bit longer, I'd convince you.
Okay. Next time we'll do an hour show with no commercials. Thanks again.